My name is Evelyn, and at 35, I never imagined I'd learn how quiet a house can be after a heart stops beating. 3 months ago, my husband Nathan collapsed from a sudden brain aneurysm and never came home. 2 days after the funeral, I stood in my sister's backyard for my nephew Owen's first birthday, swallowing grief and sheet cake, when my sister Hannah lifted a cup and a lie. "Owen is Nathan's son," she announced, waving a will that supposedly gave her half of my home. I didn't scream. I almost laughed. Nathan and I met under lantern lights at a charity art walk in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He outbid everyone for a sunset landscape I couldn't stop staring at, then pressed it into my hands like a promise. He was steady, attentive, the sort of man who remembered baristas' names and tipped too much. We married beside adobe walls, the color of warm sand, and bought a creaky old bungalow near Canyon Road that we renovated room by room. Children never came despite years of calendars, doctors, and Kiet drives home. When the last attempt failed, he held my hand on the porch and said, "You and me is enough." I believed him. I still do. Hannah clinked a plastic cup against a butter knife, and the backyard fell into that brittle hush people reserve for fireworks and disasters. Sky blue balloons bobbed against a desert sky. Paper plates sagged with sheet cake, and my mother stared fixedly at her sandals, as if they might explain the universe. I stood with a napkin crumpled in my fist, feeling every eye on my widow black dress. "Thank you for coming to celebrate Owen," Hannah said, voice bright and rehearsed. Then she set the fuse. "He isn't Tyler's. He's Nathan's." She held up a single page, like a magician, revealing a dove. Nathan updated his will. "Half of Evelyn's house belongs to Owen. Somewhere, sprinkler, tickle." Someone gasped. My father half rose from a folding chair and sat back down like the air had turned to wet cement. I felt nothing at first, the kind of numb that swallows earthquakes. Then, unexpectedly, a bubble of laughter pushed up my throat. I bit it back so hard, my jaw ached. "May I see it?" I asked. Hannah faltered, but she walked it over, chin high. The document was slick with toner, dressed in legalese that sounded like a Halloween costume close, but not quite human. I knew Nathan's contracts. I'd watched him parse commas like landmines. This will was all wrong. Wrong font, wrong phrasing, and the signature, God, Nathan's real signature, had a shy little hitch between the N and the A, a soft shoulder where his pen always paused. This one sprinted, all flourish and bravado. Not his hand, not his truth. "Thank you," I said, handing it back as if it were a hot pan. "This is Owen's day." I placed my gift on the table and kissed my mother's cheek. Faces tilted toward me like sunflowers. I smiled steady, pleasant, absolutely inappropriate, and walked out. In my car, the laughter finally detonated. Not joy. Never joy. It was grief cracking under pressure, disbelief erupting into sound. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel until the faux leather left a pattern on my skin and whispered into the empty air, "Not today." Because there was a fact Hannah didn't have, and a line she couldn't cross 2 years before Owen existed. Nathan had a vasectomy, a medical full stop on the sentence she was trying to rewrite. I had sat beside him on our adobe porch afterward, blue ice pack tucked beneath a quilt, his hand in mine as the swallows looped over the cottonwoods. We kept that part of our story private, a boundary in a world that wanted to inventory our grief. Back in the present, I pulled onto Canyon Road, past galleries glowing with evening light, and felt something unfamiliar settle into my bones. Resolve. The turning point wasn't Hannah's performance. It was my decision not to burn down the backyard to prove a point. I would not be the woman who screamed while a 1-year-old smeared frosting across his cheeks. I would be the woman who documented, who consulted, who moved like bedrock. That night, I opened Nathan's file cabinet, the one he labeled in neat block letters, Estate, Personal. I found our attorney's card, the notarized originals, the follow-up lab results, confirming what we already knew. I slipped them into a folder, slid on my wedding band, like armor, and stared at our Santa Fe painting, the one he'd placed in my hands the night we met. Oranges bleeding into purple over a horizon that had once meant forever. Okay, I told the room, my voice steady at last. We do this the right way. The next morning, the desert dawn broke clean and merciless. I was done being merciful to lies. At 8. 1 a.m. Someone pounded on my front door, hard enough to rattle the stained glass transom. A uniformed deputy stood on the porch with the sun behind him like a halo I didn't believe in. "Evelyn Grant?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me a manila envelope. "You've been served." Inside a petition to probate a later will, a notice of claim against my property, and a notice that a lis pendens, a cloud on my title, had already been recorded at the county clerk's office. Hannah had turned her backyard theater into a courthouse stunt overnight. My hands shook, but the room didn't spin. I set the papers on the breakfast bar, lined them up with the grout, like I could straighten the world by centimeters, and called our attorney. Martin Hale answered on the second ring. "Do not engage with your sister," he said, voice steady as a metronome. "Bring me the originals. We'll file a motion to quash and seek sanctions." And Evelyn check. Anywhere Nathan might have put backup documentation. He was meticulous. After we hung up, I drove to the credit union on Cerrillos Road, the same place where we'd signed mortgage papers with ink that felt permanent until this morning. The branch manager, who knew Nathan's laugh and my name, guided me into a small viewing room and set a slim gray box on the table. Inside our notarized will, post-op reports, copies of emails with Martin, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope in Nathan's blocky print, "For Ev, open only if you have to." My breath snagged. I slid a finger under the flap. "Ev," the letter began, "if you're here, something went wrong. And you know, I try to plan for everything. I hope this is an overreaction. But if anyone ever questions us, this file should be enough. If it isn't, call Martin. And remind yourself, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest." A photo slipped out with the pages Nathan on our porch, grinning, a blue ice pack balanced like a joke crown. On the back, he'd written the date, the week of his vasectomy, and a line that made my throat close. We choose our family by how we protect it. I didn't cry. There wasn't time. I scanned everything at the branch copier, emailed the PDFs to Martin, and walked out into a sky so bright it felt accusatory. Halfway to his office, my phone buzzed again, Hannah's name filling the screen. Then a notification tsunami: tags, shares, comments. She'd posted a filtered selfie, captioned, "Truth hurts. Pray for Owen." The forged page sat center frame like scripture. Strangers were already choosing sides. Some called me a thief. Others called Hannah a homewrecker. No one knew us. The unexpected part wasn't the smear. It was my calm. At Martin's, we spread documents across a conference table the size of a ship's deck. He compared signatures, highlighted dates, pointed to the medical code that made Hannah's claim collapse before it could stand. He dictated filings to his paralegal without raising his voice. When he finished, he looked at me over the rims of his glasses. 2 tracks, he said. Legal, will move fast. Personal, decide your boundary. Do you want public blood sport, or do you want leverage to end this cleanly? I thought of Owen's frosting-smeared smile, of Nathan's letter, of the porch, where we'd practiced surviving. The deputy's knock had felt like a breach. Nathan's envelope felt like a hand on my back, steadying. Both, I said. We fight by the book, and we leave a door open for the baby who didn't ask for any of this. Martin nodded. Then let's start the clock. That afternoon, Santa Fe's sun slid low and turned every stucco wall to fire. I set my phone. Face down, muted the strangers, the pitying DMs, the threats wrapped in prayer hands, and walked to the little courtyard where the agave throws its shadows like ribs. Nathan's letter lay open on my lap, creased, where my fingers wouldn't let go. I'd thought the turning point was paperwork, a clean stack of facts that could bulldoze a lie. But sitting there with the cicadas ticking, I realized my war wasn't only with Hannah. It was with the part of me that apologized to keep the peace, that mistook silence for grace. I could be kind without being convenient. I could love my family and still lock the front door. I called Dr. Mayapatel, the grief counselor my neighbor had sworn by, and she fit me in that evening. Her office smelled faintly of sage and copier ink. A fountain burbled behind her shoulder, the world's smallest river, refusing to stop. I'm not here to talk about death, I said, before I could lose my nerve. I'm here to talk about choosing myself without becoming cruel. She didn't argue. She asked about Hannah and about the childhood geometry that had decided our roles. I was the reliable eldest who smoothed edges. Hannah was the sparkler, everyone shielded with cupped hands. Somewhere along the line, protecting her had become a family hobby. Somewhere along the line, I became easy to take. Grief shrinks your life to the essentials. Dr. Patel said, sometimes that makes your boundaries clearer. Sometimes it makes you afraid to enforce them, which is true for you. Both, I admitted. I'm clear. I'm afraid. She nodded, like fear was as ordinary as breath. Here's a reframe. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're instructions for how to love you. On the drive home, the city lights stitched the dark like careful mending. I passed the gallery where Nathan and I first met, paper lanterns bobbing, artists gesturing with paint-streaked hands, and felt the ache that always follows memory. I wasn't becoming someone new. I was growing back into someone I had once been before life taught me to apologize for taking up space. At home, I spread 2 pieces of paper on the kitchen island, Martin's legal plan on the left, my personal plan on the right. Left was crisp, motion to quash, sanctions, hold the line. Right was messier, but just as firm, no public brawls, no midnight texts. One conversation, recorded with consent. Offer Hannah a way out that centers Owen, not her entitlement. Require therapy, budgeting, work. Establish a trust for the baby administered by me and a neutral third party. If she refuses, proceed legally without regret. I wrote one more line and underlined it twice. I will not rescue the behavior that hurt me. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet click inside. The feeling of a door finally closing on a room I'd been trapped in for years. I slipped Nathan's letter into a clear sheet protector, not because paper needed armor, but because I did, and texted Hannah. We need to talk. My place. Tomorrow at 2. Just you. Her reply popped up fast. Finally. See you then. I didn't rehearse speeches. I set out glasses, water, a small recorder we would both agree to. I laid the documents in order. Then I stood in front of the sunset, painting Nathan had given me, and let myself imagine a future where my love for him wasn't measured by how quietly I suffered, but by how bravely I told the truth. Instructions for how to love me, I whispered, tasting the words. For once, they didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a beginning. At 1:58 p.m., sunlight knifed through the clerestory window and laid a bright stripe across the coffee table, where I'd arranged everything water glasses, a small recorder we'd both consent to, a neat stack of documents, a pen that wrote, like truth. I could feel the old Evelyn, apologize first, negotiate later, hovering at my shoulder. I invited her to sit down and watch. 2 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to Hannah. Fresh highlights, new blouse, the kind of confidence people rent for the afternoon. Let's keep this simple, she said, as I let her in. Agreed, I replied, pressing record. I stated the time, date, and that we both consented. Her chin lifted, daring me to blink. First, before we talk, I said, sliding the first page across, you should see what notarized looks like. The original will, embossed seal catching the light. Next, a copy of Nathan's post-op report and the follow-up analysis. Words like azoospermia don't leave much room for fairy tales. Hannah's face drained, then flushed. You could have faked those, she said, but there was no muscle in it. There's more, I answered, and signaled. The front door opened again. In stepped Caleb Romero, a private investigator, referred by Martin, square-shouldered, polite, carrying a folder, thick as a phone book. I'm here as a witness, I said, and to keep this conversation honest. Caleb set down printouts, screen captures of Hannah's texts with Zoe, the friend who'd cheered on the forgery, a copy of the eviction notice, 3 declined applications for short-term loans, and a string of messages to a guy named Dave about matching signatures. He also placed one last sheet on the pile, a background check for Tyler, whose record included a protective order and a recent bench warrant for unpaid support on another child. The room went still. Outside, a dove cooed like a metronome. "This is the part where you decide what story you want to be in," I said softly. "You can choose the courtroom version, which ends badly for you and loudly, or you can choose the family version, which centers Owen." Her eyes flicked to the recorder, to the will, to my hands. Steady for once. "What does the family version look like?" I slid a fresh document across the table, a proposal I'd written at midnight. "You retract your claims in writing and publicly take down your posts. Post a correction, apologize to me and to Nathan's memory. You sign a non-disparagement agreement and a promise to never assert paternity or property claims again. In return, I establish the Owen Grant Health and Education Trust, managed by a neutral bank with me as co-trustee. Funds pay only for his medical care and schooling, not rent, vacations, or handbags." Her mouth tightened. "You're trying to control me." "I'm trying to protect a baby," I said, "and protect myself. There are conditions. You begin therapy and financial counseling. You maintain lawful employment. You give me emergency medical authorization for Owen when he's with me. And we add a standby guardianship clause. If a court ever finds you unfit or you disappear, Owen comes to me until a judge decides otherwise. This isn't punishment. It's structure." She stared at the stack, at the way the evidence built a staircase out of the hole she'd dug. "And if I refuse," I nodded toward the left-hand folder motions. "Sanctions. Referral to the DA for forgery. Then we do it that way. I won't enjoy it. I also won't hesitate." Something in her posture loosened, like a wire finally cut. Tears gathered, real ones, the kind that make people look suddenly, unbearably young. "I'm drowning, Ev," she whispered. "And I hate that you're the one with a life preserver." "I hate it too," I admitted. "But I'm throwing it anyway." "For him?" Her shoulders dropped. "Read me the terms again," she said, voice rough. Slowly. I did. And for the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a door slamming. It felt like a hinge, oiled and ready. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, and for once, it didn't scare me. Martin slid our motion across the table. Hannah sat 2 chairs down, with a public defender and eyes that wouldn't hold mine. When the judge asked about the later will, Martin didn't raise his voice. He pointed to the notarized original, the medical reports, the metadata from the forged PDF. The lis pendens was vacated in under 10 minutes. The judge peered over his glasses at Hannah. "Miss Torres, this is the closest you'll get to mercy in a courtroom. Choose wisely outside of it." We stepped into the hallway's echo. Hannah whispered, "I'll post the apology tonight." I nodded, not triumphal, just tired. Growth isn't fireworks. It's a steady hand on a wheel you used to let go of. That evening, she took down the selfie and replaced it with a paragraph that sounded like skin meeting gravel. I lied. Owen is not Nathan's child. I'm sorry to Evelyn and to Nathan's memory. I will not pursue claims against her home. Comments exploded. I didn't read them. Instead, I brewed tea, texted Dr. Patel a thank you, and filled out the trustee forms for the Owen Grant Health and Education Trust. The banker on the other end of the line walked me through the guardrails, medical invoices, only, tuition only, dual signatures required. It felt less like charity and more like architecture. My parents came by 2 days later with casseroles and opinions. My mother started with, "Family should forgive," and I felt that old urge to fold myself small. I didn't. "Forgiveness isn't a policy," I said, calm as the kettle beginning to hum. "It's a process. Here are my boundaries." I laid them out. No triangulating. No surprise visits with Hannah. No calling me to mediate. If you push past them, I'll leave the conversation. If you respect them, we'll have a chance to heal. My father nodded, looking relieved to be handed instructions. My mother's mouth pinched, then softened. "All right," she said. "Teach us." That was new. On Fridays, I met Owen at the pediatric cardiology clinic. He learned to clap at the fish decal by the scale. I learned the language of ejection fractions and follow-ups. We kept a small backpack at my place diapers, a toy ambulance, a copy of Goodnight Moon, with a cracked spine. When Hannah started therapy, she sent proof, without being asked. She found a reception job at a physical therapy office and texted, "First paycheck that isn't tips in years." I responded with a thumbs up and the trust's account info for Owen's copay. Not warmth exactly, but a working bridge. Grief didn't loosen its teeth just because life behaved. I still woke at 3 a.m., sometimes reaching for a hand that isn't there. On those nights, I sat under the painting Nathan once pressed into my palms and read his letter again. It didn't hurt less. It hurt cleaner. That was its own kind of blessing. I started a small scholarship through the community college, the Nathan Grant Ethics Award for first-generation students studying business law. On the application, I asked for a short essay. Tell us about a time you chose integrity when convenience was cheaper. Reading their answers became a ritual that stitched me back to hope. The biggest change, though, was quiet. I stopped rehearsing speeches in the shower. I stopped writing texts I didn't send. When Hannah called in tears about a broken alternator, I didn't sprint. "I can watch Owen while you sort it out," I offered. "The trust can't pay for car repairs. Try the sliding scale mechanic on Agua Fria." She sighed, then said, "Okay." We both survived the boundary. That felt like a miracle. No algorithm would notice. 1 month later, I stood in my courtyard holding Owen, while the dusk turned adobe walls the color of apricots. He patted my cheek with a cracker crumb hand and laughed at nothing. Somewhere beyond the fence, a motorcycle rumbled past and kept going. I realized I was breathing in a way that reached all the way down. Stronger, not louder. Present, not pleasing. Still, Evelyn just finally on my own side. A year after the knock on my door, a spring swept through Santa Fe like someone opening a window. The cottonwoods trembled with new leaves. The galleries hung bright works that looked like courage. In my courtyard, the agave threw up a tall, absurd bloom, proof that even stubborn plants choose wonder when they can. On a Saturday morning, Owen toddled across the flagstones, chasing a bubble that refused to burst. Hannah sat on the bench by the wall, a paper cup of coffee between her palms. No filters, no speeches, just the quiet scrape of starting over. She'd kept every term therapy, budgeting, steady hours at the clinic. The trust paid for Owen's cardiology follow-ups and a sturdy car seat. I paid for juice boxes and museum passes. Somewhere between the receipts and the check-ins, a fragile piece grew. "Thank you," she said, eyes on Owen, voice small but unshaking. Not the groveling kind of thank you, the grown-up kind. "I'm grateful too," I answered, and meant it. Grateful for structure that protected us both. Grateful for a baby who laughed like wind chimes, unconcerned with the chapters before him. Grief didn't leave. It learned new manners. I still catch myself setting an extra mug on the counter before remembering Nathan's mug is now a pencil holder in my office. I still read his letter some nights, the paper softening where my thumbs always land. But the edges aren't knives anymore. They're signposts. We dedicated the first Nathan Grant Ethics Award one crisp evening at the community college. A first-gen student named Jason Sharp Suit, shaking hands, spoke about refusing to cheat on an exam, even when the stakes felt life-sized. As he finished, applause rose like a tide. I felt something unclench. This was what love could do after loss build, not just ache. I started saying yes to small invitations. Life sent a pottery class where I made lopsided bowls and met Oliver, a teacher who laughed with his whole face. Sunday hikes in the foothills with neighbors who knew when to talk and when to let the desert do the talking. Dinners that ended early because rest is holy. I didn't measure these beginnings against my marriage. I let them be themselves. Love isn't a replacement plan. It's a different language you learn with the accent you already have. One afternoon, Martin stopped by to sign an annual report for the trust. He stood in front of the sunset, painting the one Nathan once placed in my hands, and said, almost to himself, "He chose well." I thought he meant the art. Then I realized he meant me, the woman who didn't torch a backyard to win an argument, who stacked facts until the truth could stand on its own legs, who built a fence around her heart and put a gate in it for the people who could knock with respect. Dr. Patel's sentence keeps living on my fridge in magnet letters. Boundaries are instructions for how to love me. I used to fear boundaries would make me smaller. They didn't. They made room for integrity, for generosity that didn't bankrupt me, for the version of Evelyn who doesn't apologize for taking up space. At dusk, I lifted Owen so he could touch the painting's frame. "Sunset," he announced, proud of the word. I kissed his crumb-sticky hair and looked out at the long light laying a ribbon across the courtyard. Nathan's love didn't end. It changed jobs. It became scaffolding. It became the part of me that insists on truth, on tenderness with a spine, on hope that walks instead of sprints. Some days, healing looks like paperwork and a good pen. Some days, it looks like a toddler clapping at bubbles. Most days, it looks like choosing again and again to live a life you'd be proud to tell the person you lost about. I am Nathan. I am what saved me, wasn't a louder voice, it was a steadier one. I learned that integrity beats urgency, and that boundaries aren't walls you build out of anger, they're instructions for how to love you. Choosing compassion doesn't require surrendering your safety. You can care for a child without subsidizing the behavior that put that child at risk. I learned to separate forgiveness from access. Forgiving Hannah is a process. Restoring access to my life depends on consistent change. I also learned that paperwork is not cold, it's a form of care. Wills, medical records, trusts, and written agreements aren't about winning. They're about protecting truth, so love can keep doing its job. Grief taught me to simplify, speak plainly, document clearly, act slowly, and let the facts carry the weight. Hope isn't a feeling that arrives after the storm. It's the structure you build during it. Appointments kept, accounts secured, a baby buckled into a safer car seat, a scholarship mailed on time. Strength is not ferocity. It's fidelity to your values, to your boundaries, to the people you're responsible for, including yourself.